Hello and welcome to our career masterclass. Is an MBA enough to be a business leader today? The ideal profile of a digital business leader in 2021. Our speaker today is Professor Jagdish Sheth, who is the Charles H. Kellstadt Professor of Business at Emory University. I'm Stuart Creek. I'm in the marketing department here at Simplilearn. And before we get started, a quick note on how to operate the WebEx controls for those of you on WebEx. Please enter your questions for Professor Sheth on the Q&A function, Q&A box. We will log those together and give those to him at the end of the presentation in our Q&A session. And then if you do have chat messages for us, make sure you address those to all panelists so that we all see them. If you are on the live streams with YouTube Live or LinkedIn Live, when we come up with polls, we will let you put the answers into the chat box. This is our first poll, and we'll do another one at the end of the presentation. And this poll asks your level of experience and how you are doing today. So if you would take about half a minute and let us know how much experience you currently have. And then we'd like to ask how you're feeling today. We've been asking this since the start of the pandemic to see how people are coping. And just about 15 seconds more we'll give you. And we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So as you can see, we have a seasoned audience here. 40% of the respondents have 10 or more years of experience. And we also, thankfully, have most people saying that they're doing well today. For those of you who are not feeling so well, hopefully this presentation will give you useful information that will help brighten your mood. So with that, I am going to introduce Professor Jagdish Sheth, the Charles H. Kellstadt Professor of Business at Emory University. He is a renowned scholar. He's an internationally recognized thought leader who's published over 300 research papers, over 30 books. He is the 2020 Padma Bhushan Award recipient from the government of India. And he's a noted expert in modern business trends and how to be a business leader. And welcome, Professor. I'm going to stop sharing the slides and we'll just have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Stuart.
Thank you for being here this morning, Professor. This morning here where we are in North America, we have a lot of folks who are in our Indian audience. And as I noted, we have a fairly seasoned group. So these people are very curious about how things have changed from the traditional world where the MBA used to be the ticket to business leadership. And your thesis is that this is not the case today. Can you tell us about how you view that?
I think the MBA was designed primarily for the industrial age. It really was introduced right after World War II, primarily for engineers to learn internal vocabulary and the language of business as they join a company, hoping that from engineering, they will rise to management level. That was the whole intent.
No.
So they had to learn typical things like double entry systems, macroeconomics, microeconomics, behavioral sciences. It is no longer the case today. There's a huge change. First of all, we are in the digital age. So all the processes and the procedures established were on a manual basis at one time. And today everything is computerized to a level where you can't work without access to the computer and the network and the databases.
Right.
Clearly one. So that's one main factor. The other reason is that events are taking place today outside the control of the company. An MBA was never designed for externalities or plan B in some fashion. And I will give you two quick examples. First one is more man-made, which was the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, with all of the restructuring of the housing market, leveraging it to a level, the whole economy collapsed. Its impact on business was massive, not just on the down of the stock price, for example, but it was a lot greater than that. Liquidity became an issue, and how do you manage your corporation? People with cash flow began to buy out others, just went on and on. And of course, more currently, it is the impact of pandemic. Nobody imagined that a natural disaster, first of all, will last this long, unlike an earthquake or a flood or something, and will have such a persistent change. So I think that is very key. So we have to revise the MBA because more external factors are driving the industry and the company, such as a supply chain disruption, for example. It's really more. So we have to understand that that's clearly one major factor. It was designed for internal communication, internal coordination. How do we relate to the external ecosystem and the environment is becoming very key. And I'll just give you a couple of examples to it. At one time, the typical CFO job used to be primarily you were a accounting guy, you had a controller, you had a treasurer, you became the CFO, mostly managing internal capital. But today's CFO has to be very good at mergers and acquisitions. How do you negotiate between two companies is far greater different skill set. That is true for HR function. It is no longer compliance and procedures. It is saying, how do I recruit talent for the next generation? Every major function today at the top level, like a VP of manufacturing, HR function, finance, have a next plateau of understanding which the current MBA does not offer. So that's one factor. Industrial age to the digital age, or what I call the world is going from physical first to digital first. Everything we are doing is digital first, right?
Yeah.
My second reason is very different. This MBA was designed for general managers. In other words, how quickly you are a typical IIT graduate in India, top engineering college, you join IIM, top management college, you start at the lower level, but you are ramped up very quickly to become a brand manager, a business unit manager, and you rise to the top in your early 40s, late 30s. Today, that is not the case. Today, surprisingly, what people are looking for in the MBA program is specialized MBA. So you have to be a generalist, we understand, but are you also very much in depth? So what I call a deep generalist. How are you expert in that field? So just give you another example. 40% of all the budget today is going for digital conversion into the marketing function. It is no longer the CIO traditionally, which is mostly downsizing, outsizing, putting things on the cloud computing, etc., etc. But 40% of the IT budget is going for the marketing discipline, which is changing dramatically from paper and pencil to television to now, obviously, everything digital advertising, digital communication. And the chief marketing officer has no idea about digital marketing. So
Yeah.
that's the second major factor. So you have to have more depth in your discipline today than ever before. And a third factor is the one that I know is your passion also, namely that half-life of knowledge is getting shorter and shorter. In software, it is down to 18 months. In management, it is also down to 18 months. So by the time you graduate in a typical MBA, 40% of the knowledge is already gone. 60% of the knowledge is already gone. So you have to have more depth in your discipline today than ever before. And a third factor is the one that I know is your passion also, namely that half-life of knowledge is getting shorter and shorter. In software, it is down to 18 months. In management, it is also down to 18 months. whether it is more advanced MBA after working a few years, half of the knowledge is obsolete or its useful life is gone. So the concepts that we studied in the old days about time and motion studies, concepts like we studied about, managing the queuing system, for example, in stochastic processes and, the just-in-time inventory. Now
Uh-huh.
today, we have to learn more about blockchain. We have to learn more about distributed manufacturing. We have to learn about, how to coordinate smaller quantities you made in all different locations, and at the same time you have an uninterrupted supply chain. So half-life of knowledge is getting shorter and shorter. That means by definition, MBA is no longer a terminal degree. You have to start thinking about lifelong learning. How do you go into lifelong learning while you are on the job becomes very important. So that's the third message that comes about why the current MBA to generate leadership is not as useful as it used to be.
Right. Yeah, and I take your point about the MBA being a product of the Second World War and the post-war
Yeah,
environment. One of the things that happened in the Second World War was the rise of scientific management in production with people like
yeah,
Juran and Peter
yes,
Drucker and that type of thing. And that became the template for management for many years. And it's great for a world where products don't change very quickly and you can manufacture in large runs. Um, and then, of course, the Japanese manufacturing revolution, people
right,
started learning how to be more adaptive. But today, as you said, a lot of products don't have a physical form.
right.
They're essentially digital products or services. And um, we live in a world now where product updates can happen many times a day. If you look at the product like Facebook or that type of thing,
Yeah,
where not only do the updates happen many times a day, but you don't even know they're happening until you
right,
see the presence of a new button or your function operates a little bit differently than it did yesterday.
right.
And so we live in a very uh, different world. Um, when you look at one of the trends in business today, we hear much more and have been hearing much more about stakeholders than shareholders. And
Yes.
so, how is the notion of business as an enterprise to make profit for shareholders transformed into business as uh, serving a range of stakeholders?
Business of business has always been more than business. To look at the history of industrial revolution in England and in Germany, if you go back to the cities which are bigger cities now, like Birmingham, for example, in
Uh-huh.
England, or if you go to Newcastle, for example,
Hmm.
those were locations blessed with rivers, waterways, or some natural resource like iron ore or whatever it is. Wealthy families began to settle there to go from the agriculture to the industrial age, and they lived in those small towns. The towns invited them, gave them the natural resources, access, public resources in many ways. And there was a very good symbiotic relationship like two peas in a pod. If the family remained in that small town, they always were stakeholder oriented because every Sunday you went to church and church was a great equalizer. You are not above God was a clear message about the community, and you understood that message. Your neighbors actually were your managers, or your managers were your neighbors. Your children went to the same school, or grandchildren, if you're older, as your manager's children. So you had a lot of informal social communication outside of the corporate hierarchy.
Hmm.
There was only one school typically in that town. This is how the families were always, wealthy families were always stakeholder oriented. They were interested in suppliers who came to offer their services because you were based in there. It'll be almost like Bentonville, Arkansas today for Walmart,
Right.
Schenectady for General Electric, Armonk for IBM, which all moved away from the small town mentality to go for the bigger city. And once you listed your stocks on the public market, you had to relocate to the capital markets. So the family members began to say, older generation can stay here, but we will move away toward the capital markets like New York, London, Hong Kong, wherever they are, or Bombay in India, for example, away from the roots. And therefore, now you are preoccupied with only one stakeholder out of the five stakeholders. You forget the community where you made the money, where your factories are. You don't live in that factory town. You
Right.
forget your suppliers and their loyalty and their value, what you can create. Forget the employees and even forget the customers. Surprisingly, you become shareholder obsessed. I think this divorce of the family away from the place of where you do the work to the place where you live and go to the capital markets, I think it went out of hand. After the first energy crisis in the 70s, as you know, we had a probably major restructuring, which we haven't talked about as much as the Great Depression, but private equity took hold of the companies. Stock market collapsed after the energy crisis. You were a conglomerate, large conglomerates, and therefore the value was very good. Your stock price was down, your debt capital went up, your debt to equity ratio, we created junk bonds to survive the companies. And surprisingly, in the process, private equity companies, whether it's Warren Buffett's company or KKR, which was a more hostile takeover, would buy out the company by investing and break them into pieces. So obsession towards shareholder value became much stronger in the early 80s and lasted till about recently. Today, now we are back to the same notion that business as an institution has a purpose in life other than making money. That was a wrong paradigm. It never was there, but it was imposed because of the economic necessities. Like in the 80s, we did outsizing, downsizing, right sizing, outsourcing. We did everything only to survive for the shareholder. And I think that notion is becoming. So today we have an idea that actually it is in your self interest that to be stakeholder oriented, because doing well by doing good gives you more financial returns. And I have a book out by my colleague Raj Sisodia and myself, or maybe 15 years ago. We wrote it called Forms of Endearment, where we showed companies that were employee oriented, customer oriented, community oriented, and supplier oriented, actually financially performed better than the companies that were strictly shareholder oriented, which was the book called Good to Great. Look
Mm-hmm.
at that thing. Good to great, the new paradigm is great to gone.
Yeah.
All great companies who are shareholder driven. I mean, the icon was General Electric. We praised
Exactly.
Jack Welch so well, but it's gone now. It's
It, it,
fascinating to watch. Yeah,
it's interesting. The two of the trends you mentioned. One is financial engineering, because I
yeah,
recall during the
yeah,
1980s and even before that, we had the rise of junk bonds, which was taking a look at companies simply from their financial perspective and saying,
right.
well, we can sell high interest, high interest bonds to help these companies reach the financial markets. But that led to restructurings that completely decimated, old brand
Absolutely.
companies. And the let's see if I can remember what I was about to say about the other trend.
Yeah,
It'll come back to me. I'm sorry, but it
sure,
was
sure.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Great to good, um, good to great, great to gone. I remember the era of you know in pursuit of excellence, where we had companies like
Yes,
GM and General Electric and 3M and these wonderful brands held up as the perfect examples of how to manage. And like dinosaurs, they've tended to go by the wayside.
Yes.
If they
Yes.
haven't completely reinvented themselves, they're not here anymore, or they're not
Absolutely.
significant anymore. So those are
Absolutely.
great points.
I have a book on that one actually. Again, came out in 2007. I originally had the title. The question was, this is the most insightful question I've been ever asked by chairman of a large company when you are a one-on-one advisor like a coach. In one of the luncheon meetings, just one-on-one, he raised a question, why good companies fail. And I never thought good companies fail. Institutions never fail. They're immortal. Humans are mortal. I said, I have no answer, but I will do all the research, and came out with a book called The 7 Bad Habits of Good Companies or Self-Destructive Habits of Good Companies. And the underlying punchline was, from all the research, the good companies fail when they're either unable or unwilling to change when the external ecosystem has changed dramatically, technology, globalization, competition, whatever the paradigm is, or rules, regulations, or policy change. So unwillingness is very interestingly. So here is a company called Digital, world class, by the way. I mean, they really competed well with IBM, who is a monopoly.
Yes.
But the founder, Ken Olsen, never believed that the PC can do the work of a mainframe computer. He thought PC was a toy. He was an MIT brilliant scientist, and he destroyed the company on his way out. I've never seen a founder destroying the company in 25 years after ramping up so well, because he had a belief system that he never believed in this technology power as we see today, cell phone today, in fact, the same way. Let
Hmm.
me take a little example here, Stuart. Today's automobile, and I worked in the auto industry for all major companies. It was primarily electromechanical thing. Today, an automobile is not metal bending, but it is a software and basically what I would call chips and software, okay?
Hmm.
To me, a Tesla is nothing more than nothing less than a very large mobile smartphone. It's just like a smartphone.
Right. That
It's,
that
it's
that's
interesting.
that's a very good way of looking at it. It's a very accurate
Yeah,
metaphor for that.
yeah. So technology has transformed the auto industry. Of course, from the gasoline engine, we are now going toward electric engine. These things are all happening. So the best of the companies, unless they are able to change, cannot survive. One of the best, one of the bad habits in my 7 bad habits is denial of new realities. I saw that in the 70s in the auto industry, where they were laughed at Japanese car makers, small, Datsun 210,
Hmm.
Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, small cars. They said these guys are fine. They will maybe remain as niche players. They will never compete. But today, if you look at the global rule of three of automobiles, Volkswagen is number one, Toyota follows number two, GM, Ford are distant third, fourth, and there is no guarantee that both can even survive. There's a huge consolidation that is about to take place in the auto industry with two key transforming changes. One, of course, is the battery driven electric cars, and the other one is Tesla like cars, which is basically a software driven mechanical product essentially.
Right.
And so, and then market has shifted. It's no longer America, the largest market. The market is all China now. So Chinese policy will make more difference about the auto industry than the American policy or even the European Union policy, just as an example.
Yeah. And to your point about automobiles as being software and chips, one of the big issues in the U.S. recovery now is the inability of automobile companies to be able to access chips. The
Yeah,
global supply chain having been
right,
changed and disrupted, they can't get the chips that go into the cars. And
right,
unlike years past, you can't just go to a foundry and say, "Here's the specifications, make this part." You know,
right,
there's so even when President Biden says we're going to bring chip manufacturing back to the United States, that's a problem that's tens of billions of dollars and several years to solve, rather than a
right.
simple let's roll up our sleeves and get it done.
Yeah,
And it reflects the idea that companies didn't look forward and say, well, the nature of our product has changed, and now we don't, need to worry about whether we are near a source of steel and coke. We need to be worried about whether we have adequate supply to uh, silicon and fabricated chips. So
Yeah.
it's quite an interesting difference. What was the name of the second book that you mentioned, by the way?
It's called the Self-Destructive Habits of Good Companies. And it was just reprinted in India with updates by Pearson. I think it was released in month of April or May, somewhere around that time. It's worth reading because it really shows you how companies destroy themselves, not competition destroying them, or a population ecology. That means primarily life and birth and death kind of a notion, inevitability of dying because you were born. This is a very different theory. It is already translated in 14 languages that I know of. For example, it struck
Uh-huh.
a chord, came out just before 2008, 2009 economic recession, or a great recession as we call it. And the book is even more relevant today because think about the whole change in technology today in among the all industries I've analyzed. There is always one large company among the top three companies is from an emerging markets. So there are
Uh-huh.
many industries where Mexico dominates, one of the companies, like Grupo Bimbo in flour or all-purpose flour, for
Uh-huh.
example, and Cemex in a cement company, for
Hmm.
example. Brazil has companies that dominate the world. All the beer industry is concentrated by the Brazilians, essentially, for example. Brazilian companies have bought out Heinz through private equity. In India, you have the Aditya Birla Group, which is the largest carbon, black carbon.
Uh-huh.
It is probably the second largest in aluminum, sheet aluminum, for example. You see every place a Chinese corporation among the top ones, Lenovo in PC business, competing with HP and obviously Dell or Acer, whatever they are. You see higher in appliances. Only one company is left in America, Whirlpool. We already have GE gone because Haier bought them out. It's interesting to watch. And of course, in all the digital products, you see Alibaba of the world, just goes on and on. So Japanese are very big in, Chinese are very big in steel industry, very big in raw materials, pharmaceuticals. So one of the three global players is not all Western countries, advanced economies. There are quite a few Asian companies rising, which we have to watch as a trend.
Yep. It's um, it's a very different world from
Yes,
the post-World War era, where all of the world's economies except the U.S. were devastated by the war, and
right.
now countries that we didn't think of as industrial powerhouses have basically taken over under the radar, so to speak.
Yeah.
We have a question about if an MBA is not the path to digital leadership that it once was, what is?
That's a very good question, actually. There is no one single path. That's the first point we have to make. Greater degree of specialization in a given function is important, however you do it. So you may take a specialized MBA in finance or specialized MBA in marketing or branding or whatever it is. It's getting more and more specialized. But most importantly, I would strictly say it's lifelong learning. So online learning is going to become a part of your routine, part of the job, part of the activities that you must do. Take time out to constantly learn from either platforms like you know Simplilearn, for example, or counterparts. But more importantly, really learning from every media available. Today, social media generates so much of content. I find YouTube very useful, surprisingly. That's clearly one factor. Second one related to the MBA program is that we taught the how, know why. We give them theories, we give them explanations, frameworks, Today, you have to also know how, not just know why. Which means how to is very important at the same time. So today's MBA now is all about experiential learning, doing as much immersive learning as opposed to just cognitive learning, as we call it. So that is very key as a change. But basically, notion will be lifelong learning. In other words, don't go for the degree itself, but any certification in a specialized area. Let's say I want to study blockchain. Blockchain is a foundation for Bitcoins, but it is the foundation for all of the supply chain transactions. All four major accounting firms have blessed blockchain as an alternative to double entry system. We do it through paper and pencil or QuickBooks or something like that. I think it's a massive change. So learning those specialized skill sets as modules is more than necessary as opposed to a whole degree, for example.
And this, of course, applies to people who have already obtained the degrees.
Yes.
It's necessary to continue to study the modular skills.
Yeah.
And as you said, the CMO may not understand the digital marketing principles, but
Right.
if he or she is wise, the CMO will study digital marketing and learn the principles at least to the level where they can track
Exactly.
and manage the work of the people who do it. So
Just to amplify that, the biggest outsourcing function I found is not the IT services, which you all know quite a lot. And I was on the board of Wipro, so I understand outsourcing business and IT services. It is no longer, in fact, surprisingly HR, which was outsourced quite a lot and automated. But the largest outsourcing today of the dollars that companies spend is marketing. Marketing is basically coordinating suppliers. And we never teach in marketing courses how do you select the vendors, for example. How do you evaluate the vendors? When you buy so much, you buy market research from outside, for example. You have the distribution channels that you have to manage, which is outside. You have to manage, in fact, advertising through ad agencies. So you need to learn. You cannot be a good buyer or a sophisticated buyer unless you know the knowledge how to evaluate a group of vendors or suppliers or partners, whoever they are. I was very surprised when I found that marketing is the most outsourced function. And we never teach vendor management in marketing, for example. Let me give one more example. In the old physical days, you made the product, add the value add through manufacturing, you stored the product, brought it to the store, and waited for the customers. Today, in digital first, you are starting with order entry first. So marketing is becoming more and more supply chain management. Is it possible for marketing online platform or even a salesperson talking on the phone to know in a real time where is the inventory, how can you deliver, what is the price point? And a buyer typically wants to know how much can I buy and when will you deliver that? At one time, sales guys had no idea. They would throw the paper over on the other side to the operations or manufacturing people. But today it is seamless. So I know right now when I go online to say, is the product available right now? Is it in the stock? If it's a multi-branch retailer, they will say it is not in the stock in this branch or this retail location, but some other. I mean, it's mind-boggling change. So marketing is transforming into more like a supply chain management. So this kind of a convergence by functions is something else we need to understand also, which primarily says that there is no some such thing as one degree MBA that will be solution for everything. You have to learn again and again and again. Lifelong learning is my main message.
that's a very important message. One of the things that you've written about and spoken about is the nature of leadership.
Yes,
And one thing you say is that a key ingredient of leadership that is missing in a lot of cases is empathy.
yes.
Could you expand on that?
Yeah. Ultimately, there are three things every leader should have: competence, which is the expertise of the function or the geography or the product that you are responsible for. The other one is passion. If you don't have a passion in the management job, leadership job, it's a burnout. You will burn out so quickly. So passion is what drives, not compensation, is conclusive evidence we are finding it. But the third element, and probably equally important as passion, is empathy. Are you compassionate with the other side that you are managing? Are you compassionate toward the nature? Are you compassionate toward the physical environment? Compassionate about people? And we are finding that empathy is the missing dimension more so than competency and passion. In the tripart relationship, three legs of a stool, you need to be a good leader. Empathy needs to be emphasized a lot more. People are even oblivious of the kinds of struggles their own employees are going through in their personal lives, And people are simply saying, I'm a manager, I need demand the work to do it, and here is the way you have to deliver no matter what. I think we don't, by the way, one element of empathy is listening skills. And listening skill does not mean somebody has to say something, it's the body language.
Right.
You can hear the listening skill very quickly as you walk into the classroom, for example. We know if the class is energized today or not. It's all about learning listening skills. And great teachers are the same way. They're subject matter experts. They have a great empathy with the class they teach. And of course, they're very passionate in the subject matter. It goes beyond salary and the compensation. So it's the same thing about leadership. But what's missing is empathy.
Would you repeat for the audience the three legs of the leadership stool?
Yeah, the three legs are competence,
Mm-hmm.
or what we call expertise. Second one is empathy. Third one is enthusiasm or passion.
Yeah.
So passion, empathy, competence would be the three. And by the way, this is very important. A good leader has to have all three. There is no trade-off between one or the other. Your greater passion does not mean you cannot be empathetic also at the same time. And in our evaluation of startup people that HR practices, we only measure people's competency. We do not measure whether people are empathetic or not, or people have a passion or not. So we are adding now, because ultimately what matters most in any company is the selection process, not the training and the development. Selection is the most important criterion. Who do you select as an employee? Who do you select as a manager? Who do you select as an executive, etc. is very key. And that part of the HR function, we need to upgrade to going beyond just measuring competency or expertise or subject matter experts.
And that's an important point, because if you select the correct people with uh, who share your passion, who show empathy, and who are confident at what they do,
Yeah,
you can cultivate them with
yeah,
ongoing education, training, coaching, to make them into both
yeah,
better technical employees, but also better leaders.
yeah.
Um,
A corporation is, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
a corporation is like a good diamond cutter.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a rough diamond, corporation knows how to polish the diamond and get more brilliance out. But you cannot create a brilliant diamond out of coal.
Right.
You've got to have a rough diamond. So you
Yeah.
recruit a person who is a rough diamond, and through mentorship and leadership, you will polish and get brilliance out, which also says that there's a role change of the manager. The word boss is becoming negative now, especially with the younger talent. They hate the word boss. It's like a four-letter word in their mind. Not only that, but the young.
I can
uh,
point out that um, in some cases the word boss refers to the villain in a video game, and the
oh,
common phrase is, the big boss is the the final villain at the last level of the video game that
Right.
the one you have to defeat. So yeah, I understand that boss
Wow.
is not a good word for
Right.
a lot of young people.
And back to that empathy dimension, I think best way is to immerse yourself in those situations where you suddenly come to realize a sense of gratitude, how much better you are, a sense of therefore giving back to the society. So nowadays, many corporations, especially in India, are now recommending that the executives and managers take a time out, 1 week vacation time, paid even, and go back
Hmm.
to the villages where your forefathers came from, small villages from which they rose quite well, and serve the community there for a week. Because once you immerse into that, the poor of the society, the disadvantaged of the society, the greater the empathy you will gain in the process. Greater you will have an understanding of how blessed you are. Rather than thinking about more and more and more, you say about how do I contribute more to the society. It's becoming a very important message now, especially for leaders of corporations, to understand empathy, to understand that their role is more than just making money for themselves or for their shareholders.
Yeah. There's an expression, uh, roots and wings, which talks
Uh,
about the skills and capabilities that you've developed in life are the wings that will carry you forward. But
right.
you always have to remember the roots of where you came from and where you got not only those skills but the values behind them. And that
Yeah, right.
that's an important thing. Um, I think we can move to the questions and answers. But before we
Sure.
do, I wanted to ask if you had any other um, topic that you wanted to just cover before we did that.
There is only one area that I would strongly recommend that we all think through. I think the sustainability, environmental sustainability, is a very serious challenge. I don't think governments can solve it. I think industry or the business has an equal obligation and an interest to be sustainable themselves environmentally, not just financially. Climate change is real. I've done a lot of research. And ultimately, it says that most of the problem, as you saw yesterday's news alone, the CO2 has increased by 50% from the industrial age, before the industrial age and after the industrial age. That's the last 100 years. Very importantly, biggest reason why we have the climate change problem is that in the agricultural age, we had the production and the consumption in the same place and about the same time, like 24 hours, 48 hours, because we had no refrigeration, you could not store it.
Right.
Once we divorced production from consumption and we went into mass production thinking scale is important, so you produce so much in one place, now you have to ship it out to some other markets for it to be sold, for it to be consumed, which creates a carbon footprint. In my research, I find carbon footprint is not done as much by factories as people think, or by the transport as people think, but by the home. Especially American homes is nothing but made out of chemicals.
Hmm.
Sidings are out of chemicals, my drywalls are out of chemicals. They emit a lot of carbon footprint, surprisingly, just sitting there. And of course, refrigeration at home generates enormous carbon footprint. The automobile, which is a part of the home market, as I call it, the use of the automobile creates carbon footprint. And of course, the next place for carbon footprint turns out to be supermarkets. And as we more and more industrialize, modernize our retailing, you see supermarkets having nothing but chains of refrigerators or freezing freezers. That's putting enormous pressure. Each one counts very little, but collectively it becomes a very large footprint. In fact, most of the research shows you that 70% or more carbon footprint, air pollution, water wastage all comes from the home, which is ultimately what can consumers do, or what can the public policy and the industry cooperatively motivate the consumers to be more mindful. Mindful consumption is becoming sort of the central reason why we may change the climate back again. go back to the old ways. Today, mass customization, the Toyota processes, for example, in manufacturing, I can make cost-efficient production in smaller factories as much as I could do in big factories. I don't need that scale advantage because I know how to produce in a lean operations way. So one can have small distributed factories very easily. Production is made only for consumption in that market, not as much warehousing, storage, etc. I'm giving you a long lecture. There's a whole
No,
presentation, but I do want to mention that please be aware about sustainability becoming main important issue at the board level. One of the risk management, which is what the board is responsible for, is now asking everything about climate change. How are we doing in terms of carbon neutral or zero carbon? And that's why you see today there's much more pressure by the capitalist, people who invest in your companies are demanding that. And of course, in India, we have passed a law which says it has to be in your financial statements, annual reports, not only financial well-being, but sustainability well-being, or a CSR as they call it, is very key.
that actually leads into our Q&A very well, because one of the questions from Rebecca is, how important do you think an understanding of the UN sustainability goals will be for managers and leaders in the near and distant future?
Yeah, among the long list of things they've articulated, 17 major goals they have, such as poverty reduction, etc. But ultimately, it culminates into three major things: profit, people, planet. And I think so long as triple bottom line, as it is called, replacing the old thinking of only profit as the only motive of a corporation. So that is additional thing that we need to learn how to teach in colleges. We never talk about triple bottom line as the obligation or the opportunity for corporations. So it is very important that the United Nations New Millennium Goals, with which countries align, public policy, and the corporations also align in the same direction.
We have a YouTube live viewer named Mosman who wants to know, what are a few things you would recommend to young leaders in their 20s to focus on in order to grow and become sought after and respected leaders in their own right?
Two or three things. First, very quickly realize that there is no some such thing as your personal life and a professional life, that you can have personal life behavior in a one way and a professional in a different way. Today, everything you do is monitored, stored by the media or cameras, etc. There is no gated community behind which you can hide, which means at this age, make sure that you have all preventive measures. Don't say things that are not appropriate. Don't do things that are not appropriate. It'll be discovered even 30 years from now, as it is done recently, as you know, by many of the leaders paying the price of some misbehavior in their early days. You are young, so make sure that your code of conduct is driven by your own inner character, which is transparent and equally appropriate for family behavior as it is appropriate for professional corporate behavior. There is no some such thing as separating the two anymore. In fact, jokingly I say, but semi-seriously, if I want to know what I did yesterday, I do a Google search on me and I find I did things that I didn't even know.
Yeah.
It's all recorded, especially when you use media, smartphones and social media, it's all there. I'm amazed how much information is already gathered on all of us. So that's one key message. Second message is to do things that is of passion. Do not make a trade-off between economic livelihood and a passionate livelihood. Otherwise, you will have midlife crisis in your early 30s, 10 years from now, if you're in your 20s. Please keep that in the back of your mind. I'm 82 years old. I had an 80th birthday 2 years ago, and I got up and I say, today's 80 is the new 60. Today's 60 is the new 40. And today's 40 is all midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Because we never converged our passion with our livelihood. That's the second major message, that would work for companies or work for individuals, bosses or leaders, where you know your passion is taken out by the boss. Boss is more like a mentor, more enabling you to succeed rather than him to succeed through you, kind of a notion. That's a very important message. And the third message for the young people is that think about giving back now. Don't think about giving back only begins when you retire. Giving back does not mean money. It is time and talent. And all of you are very good, talented people. How can you give back to the society in any way, in your neighborhood, for example, family-related issues, community-wise, or a national level? It is very important because it'll give you an inner happiness so you can cope with the world in a much better way. Today, the world is unfortunately so fast moving, so fast changing, with social media everywhere out there. In fact, the largest single nation is no longer India or China, 1.3, 1.4 billion, but what I call a Facebook nation with 2 billion citizens all over the world. And there's a WhatsApp nation, there's a YouTube nation. It's fascinating. You are constantly going to be influenced by them. So you have to learn how to select properly which medium you will patronize, what kinds of things you will watch, etc. But giving back somehow would be very important because it will give you an inner anchor, an inner satisfaction. And it can be done through the corporation. It can be done in the corporation. It can be done in the community where you grew up, for example. Especially in India, this is much more important. And fortunately, that is the ethos of Indian population. Indians are trained always to say, money is not that critical. It's the knowledge that's very important. And the last message, which is a fourth element, although I like to stick with three, is that there's a very good saying in the Eastern cultures, when the student is ready, the teacher will show up. Very important. Which says that be a learner. Have the aptitude to say, I don't know anything. How can I learn more and more? And who will teach you is not as somebody who is a guru or an expert, but your peers can teach you. Your boss can teach you. Your nature can teach you. The mountain can teach you. The garden can teach you if you have the learning skills or listening skills. So aptitude to learn is the one that will drive you positively in the society. You are not just a good human being, but you have to become a good citizen of a world or a nation by and large. That's the advice I would give to younger people.
Okay. I'm looking through the questions. What Ashma asks, what do you think, in your opinion, will come after digital marketing? And there's another question related from another learner, Raviraj. Um, do you think the digital age is here to stay, or is there something that will come after the digital era?
We clearly see one consequence of the digital age itself is that it's going to make us much more individualistic. It allows us the freedom to behave each one our own way, pretty much. I mean, I have said basically that today with smartphones, every family is becoming a roommate family. You see, if a typical family, we all rush for dinner, we have no time to eat together. Dinner is a chore, how quickly we do it, and immediately each one of us goes in our own corner or our own room if we are blessed to have more bedrooms, etc. Somebody's on YouTube, somebody's text messaging, somebody's watching TV, somebody's talking. So we live like roommate family. The more you become individualistic, surprisingly, the more you are influenced by your inner self. So we go through the stage from in the digital age to have digital avatars of our own, where artificial becomes more real and more meaningful. But the stage behind that one, surprisingly, is the antidote of too much digital addiction, etc., turns out to be spirituality. So we will see the age of spirituality rising as we have more and more diffusion of digital technology over everybody, universal internet access. Smartphones will be so cheap everybody can carry. It's just like paper and pencil in the old days of literacy, 100, 200 years ago, where they became very important to have knowledge, writing, storing, memory. I think it's moving so fast. It's going to happen. The next phase, therefore, is searching for meaning of life. So there'll be more spiritual aspects will become more mainstream. And how do you bring spirituality, surprisingly, in the business world will become the next debate after the digital transformation.
Yep. And I think that kind of ties in with the notion of sustainability, because
Yeah,
one of the aspects of sustainability is a spiritual value of respecting nature, respecting the world we live in.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's a kind of a foreshadowing. We have time for, I think, the last question, which kind of also merges a few questions. There are a number of people. Rahul here, for example, asks, I'm an MBA in marketing and an engineering grad, and
Hmm.
I'm frustrated because I'm limited to sales roles in the IT industry. Um, what would be a good way to move in my career to get to where I want to go? Would it be to step down, learn some tech skills, um, and position myself as a technically capable manager?
Well, first of all, you have an ideal combination. Engineering puts you a discipline, learning about pretty high level stuff, more calculus, quantitative, STEM, whatever we call it. Managing then by selling. Selling is a good stepping stone to go some other place. While the society does not respect selling, it does one thing very important. It's the sales function that will make you more modest, because among all the people, customers have the bad habit of saying no, even though logically they should buy your product. So you learn. It's a very tough job in many ways. So I always have said that before you become a manager in a company, managing people, you really need to be sent out after your engineering and MBA for 2 years of hardcore selling, even if it says lifting soap boxes, like toilet soap and Hindustan Lever kinds of companies, or Wipro company, consumer care, out there dealing with the traders, etc. It'll make you humble. It'll make you very humble. Because here is a trader who may not be as educated as you are, but he will try to outsmart you, or he'll be most resistant to change. So you will learn how to overcome resistance to change or resistance to buy. Then you come inside the company and become a manager. Now you understand why people object to what you want them to do. I've always recommended that. So, but selling itself, unless you have the aptitude of becoming a professional salesperson, many people love it. Then it's fine. But otherwise, you migrate out of that function using that experience into marketing area or non-marketing area. In the marketing area, for example, you can easily go on the brand management side, which is less about selling, more about understanding customers, etc. You can go from marketing alone to just staying on the digital marketing front, which is a very interesting area. Or you can go from marketing to an R&D function. Surprisingly, because you have an engineering degree, people will allow you to go into the R&D function where you bring the customer perspective, which typical engineers don't have. So I can show you a number of paths you can do. And ultimately, by the way, if nothing works, best thing is to become an entrepreneur. Good education, good learning about how to work in a large corporation, all the politics that are involved in large corporations, the
Yep.
bureaucracy. Now you can become a good entrepreneur yourself and say, what can I be? And entrepreneurship is not Silicon Valley. You can
Right.
be an entrepreneur in anything. So it's very important. You can be an entrepreneur in starting a coffee shop. You can be an entrepreneur in starting a ice cream shop. You can do entrepreneurship. And during the COVID lockdown, you know how many people became innovators, improvisation. They learned so much. Quite a few are spinning out as a businesses, giving up their typical, education-based career. They're saying enough is enough now. I can do something else that I really am enjoying. It came out of sheer circumstances or by accident in many ways. So maybe that's another option that you may have to say, let me think about becoming self-employed or being an entrepreneur.
Excellent advice. I'm going to go ahead and close off this part of the presentation with the final poll. And give me a moment, I will get the polling window up for people. And you have about a half a minute, two-part question. First, what skills are you interested in learning along your lifelong learning path? And when do you plan to start? There's an expression that's, the humorous expression is, when is today the best time to start? Got about 15 seconds. Four, three, two, one. And I'll share with you the poll results. Not surprisingly, because of our topic, business and project management is the most popular response, but a lot of people are interested in fields of data science, AI, product, digital marketing. And it's nice to see that a lot of people agree with the idea that today is the best time. So with that, I want to thank you, Professor Sheth, for being here. I've put up your LinkedIn information for people who might want to contact you or find out more about you. And this has been a very wonderful session. Really appreciate it. So
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you for hosting me.
You're certainly welcome. It's been my pleasure. I would like to mention, I think I've put into our chat box a few times, our Skill Up program at Simplilearn allows free access to over 600 skills and counting. This is the self-study version with over 1,000 hours of video content available in many different skills. A new feature is you will receive a completion certificate at the end of the course, and this gives you an idea, a little basic understanding of what our more comprehensive education products are. So you can see this here, and I will again put in the chat box in a moment the link to this and the link to one of our other programs on digital transformation, and a link to our next webinar, which is Thursday, a little more than a week from today. This is a live master class in how to sharpen your interview skills as you move up in your career. Premvas is an entrepreneur and a noted expert in interviewing and in career coaching. So this will be a great session. And as I said, I'll put the link into the chat box. And that basically, concludes our webinar. You can connect with Simplilearn on our Facebook, our Twitter, and our LinkedIn channels. At Simplilearn, or search for Simplilearn is the easiest way to do that. And what I will do is right now put in the information in the chat box that I mentioned. But at this time, once I've done that, we will be done with the webinar and you'll be able to log off. So we want to thank everybody for being here. We really appreciate your taking you all taking the time to come to our webinar series, and we hope that this has been helpful. I apologize to anyone whose question we were not able to get to because of limitations of time. Sorry for the long URL for this next webinar, but I will also put in the information about our other programs. And again, that concludes the webinar. We thank you all for being here. We thank Professor Sheth again for wonderful presentation, and we'll see you future Simply Learn webinars. Bye now.
Bye.